All right, good morning, people. Hope everyone's doing well out there today. Bob back once again, ready to break down some Bitcoin. Hey, let's get right down to it. Bitcoin daily chart in front of us here. A couple different things. So, I've got this trend line drawn on here just for now, because you can see it connects here, and then technically, I guess realistically, I'd want to put it kind of there based on yesterday's low. But nonetheless, on the daily, it's tough to get trend lines that match up perfectly. So we'll just go ahead and move it here. Now, let's assume for 1 second that this is going to actually form an uptrend. What we're going to need to see is, I'll put it this way. Let's assume for 1 second that the uptrend is not going to continue. Then we've already essentially reached our peak price for the day. Because what you want to look for in a trend is, you take a look at the candle or candles that came prior, and you say, all right, are we exceeding the high from that candle? Are we exceeding the low from that candle? Well, right now we don't have a lower low. Fair enough. Right now we also don't have a higher high, so that doesn't give us a whole lot of information there to work with. But what I can say is that if we're not going to continue the uptrend, I would not expect for Bitcoin to exceed this 21,000 number here, the kind of the wick top from over here. And if we are going to actually kind of round out into a double bottom kind of a look that we at least considered as a possibility, then what we'll be looking for is to move beyond this low here today. Reasons that this might not happen, I guess a couple of different things. And then just to throw this out there too, upside targets, assuming that this is in fact going to be the low for today. It's not to say we won't come back down, retest something, say down here, 20,200 or so. But the upside target would be to get to here, so 21.7 here, 22.1. Or as far as maybe here, 22.6. Those would be kind of the upside targets, just understanding how, it's not... granted, it could also be just as feasible that Bitcoin just rips off this move straight up to the 21 on the daily. It just seems highly unlikely that will happen. But it could. It could. Now, some reasons to believe something to the positive side will happen. We've been talking about this. There is bullish divergence on the daily chart, right? We've set subsequently lower lows than these, yet the MACD histogram would suggest that they're equivalent lows, which we know is not true. In addition, we've got the Stochastic Rsi, which is pointed upwards, which again, I can point out to you where it didn't work out last time, right? And that's right here. We got this sideways garbage. So again, it's not a given, but it is bullish divergence in there. And we've got a buy on the Stochastic Rsi. This, again, more bullish divergence indications here using the MACD components, right? This looks like it could start to curl up, right? This is possible within the next few days. I would say we get a MACD cross. So the only thing in terms of looking at this, right, is that ascending patterns are inherently bearish. And if we look down here in the RSI, what I would point out to you is that this looks an awful lot like a rising wedge, which 2/3 of the time should break to the downside, and then 1/3 of the time it will break to the upside. Now, if it breaks to the downside, it's going to put it back down into this region, maybe somewhere in here. That's going to probably give us our double bottom on the price action, but it would subsequently lead to a higher low out of the RSI, thus another bullish divergence. Now, if this thing breaks to the upside, and I think there's at least a feasibility that it will, and as opposed to, because a rising wedge, if it breaks out, the likelihood is it will form into a rising channel, at which point I would alter this line right here, and then we'd be looking for a move up to this, which again would coincide very closely with something like this on, and again, that would give us our kind of higher end target for today, 22.6-ish, maybe the next 2 days. Today's Thursday. I think, generally speaking, historically, and we've talked about this, I think, sufficient times in the past, normally I expect solid price action heading into the weekend. And sometimes that can start on Thursday and then say go through like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, when things can flip bullish. It's tough to say, but I do see some positive signs out there. There are, things aren't as bleak as they were not that long ago, right? Like it's at least tangibly speaking, at least a little better than they were a week ago. Not amazing, again, don't get me wrong, but there's some indication that some altcoins are at least beginning to pop out of some downward formations. But again, everything is now quickly becoming overbought as well, even on some level of higher time frames. So, it's going to be one of those things, again, with support, resistance, get them on a chart, and go from there. You can see here the price at the moment just kind of tracking along below that high from yesterday. 20,890 is really the number I'm looking for. And again, you can see here, if you look in the upper middle portion, the high so far today is 20,812. Yesterday's was in fact 20,900. So as of right now, again, we've got a lower high, but that can all change here. So let's go ahead and zoom in on some shorter term time frames and see exactly what Bitcoin may have in store for us. Let's go ahead and move in on the 4 hour here. So I guess it all just depends, right? So we got this kind of this falling channel here that we've got kind of, more or less forming, and we can make some adjustments to the lower trend line, but for all intents and purposes, some sort of falling wedge channel. Now, this is going to be the interesting part right here. Again, and you can see on this chart too, I mean, just based on the support and resistance, again, if we can't get up really above, at least on this chart, and again, these numbers are going to be slightly off just because of the difference from one exchange to the other. But you can see here, I mean, if we can't exceed a high in the near future, I'm talking the next few hours even, if we cannot exceed a high going to somewhere in here, and even really here, then we've potentially got downside move incoming. Now, this is a 4 hour chart. We've held an ascending kind of look here. If we come down to the RSI, draw our attention here. It's always so interesting because you can see the price action was in the floor through here, and yet you can actually see we started to diverge in the RSI. So even though we were making our way down the chart here, the RSI kept saying, all right, well, eventually this pressure is going to subside and we're going to get a nice pop to the upside. And you got this real nice double bottom here. And now it's just kind of been ranging a little bit. Now, these are fairly common looking patterns here in terms of how this will play out. When you come up to a trend line like this, a lot of times what you'll do is you get this heavy move into the trend line. You get this kind of attempted recovery into it, and this typically will get rejected. And then what ends up happening is you get one more move down. You don't put in a lower low here, even though I think it's feasible we could. And then all of a sudden you spring up out of there and you break the pattern. Seen that plenty of times before. I guess we'll just have to see how it goes, really. I mean, it's, I could paint pictures a couple different ways here. I mean, this wasn't a double bottom by any means, but these kind of back-to-back candles right here almost were. Not here to here, but here to here, close. And then a couple hour push. My guess is that we probably come down through here, maybe swing down, come down. Eventually, again, this is a rising pattern here. Now the rise is actually, we can make the argument that the rise is actually improved a little bit here, as in the, so this is the original trend line. Now we've got, if we drew a line from here to here, this line, this ascent is, it's got a better, or it's a stronger angle to it, if you will. Let me do this just so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. That essentially, again, this to here on the RSI would show that this angle has improved versus having to wait it out until it gets back all the way to here. Now, again, rising patterns are inherently bearish, right? They're going to break down out of here at some point, but this is also a falling pattern within the rising. So it's feasible that, maybe we get something where this guy will kind of flag out under here, and maybe we do get another lower, maybe we get a lower low than this one, but not lower than here, and then we can, make another push towards this line. If we don't break through at that time, then we could assume fairly safely we're coming back down here. But as of right now, Stochastic RSI wants to push up. It just, who knows that it actually will right now. This recovery right here was an impressive one, right? And we got down here in that same kind of region, but this one doesn't have to do the same thing. It could certainly, there's not enough price action within the screen for me to be able to show you everything there, but, let's just say, for instance, you had this kind of significant rise here, and then it fell. When it came back up, it did not just keep going back up, right? It actually came in, put in a lower high, which is potentially what we could get here. This thing could just roll. So we'll see. And I was telling Matt this morning, we had, on the hourly, the volume looks really good, but on the 4 hour, you can see that there's very little volume here. There are a few signs, though, that still point to at least potential for this thing to break up out of here now, but I not everything I see suggests that that's actually going to be the case. So we'll kind of keep an eye on that part. So the 4 hour, again, I'm looking at this and I'm saying this is probably forming a falling channel. So maybe the next couple of 4 hour segments actually do roll back down, potentially to here. Maybe we're still looking down here as far as like our low. But again, it just depends on what we get out of this here. And this is super typical. You get to move to the upper trend line, and then it works to battle through it before eventually capitulating. And it's not a given it will capitulate out of there. It just, certainly looks as though that's a feasibility at the moment. And then finally, let's go ahead. Let's address our shortest term information here. No, and that is not the chart that's going to give us that. All right, here's the chart we're looking for to give us the shortest term information, and this is my 15-minute chart. I got a daily, weekly chart, 1 4 hour, and then this one I kind of somewhere in between. But so on this particular one, here's what this is pretty straightforward as far as I can see. We've got, if I went ahead and drew a line to represent the price action that we've got right now, this would be it, right? This line would correspond very well with that one. And let's go ahead and make this color coded so we understand that's a 15-minute line. But what else do we see here, right? On the price action, we've got a rising wedge, right? And I could make the argument that I've got a rising wedge here too. A little bit, this kind of skews it a little bit, and comparing it with this as well, that these things kind of skew it a little bit. But otherwise, it's a rising wedge. Now, on the price action, we got a falling wedge near the top of this rising wedge. So it's feasible that the 21 simple on the 15-minute comes up here, and it actually does go ahead and push the price action up again. But if it pushes it up, the measured move is the distance from here to here. You put that over here, and you're essentially looking at a double top. Maybe you come up here too again. Now, in the event that, let's say this thing actually is a fairly nice rounded bottom pattern, right? Like you could make the argument that's a decent rounded bottom. Then potentially what ends up happening is it does actually come up this right here, this rising wedge breaks to the upside. All of a sudden now we're in business a little bit. That takes us from somewhere, let's say there, to that 21.5 number that I was talking about. as far as, looking at potentially a new high. Well, that's next step is to figure out, is this going to be a breakout of here and then the subsequent higher high for today. Now, this is all going to start happening here real soon, right? I mean, if I move over here, where are we at? So this is tomorrow, right? This line right here. So let's go ahead and just put a vertical line there. That represents when tomorrow starts from a, from the standpoint of the Bitcoin cycle. There are a few things that would suggest that this actually is a reasonable feasibility. We did already kind of put in a back test on this trend line here that we were riding up for a while, right? We already kind of put in a back test on it right here. This could be a subsequent back test. That would be a big bear. That could lead to a big pullback. But I do think, at least looking at this right now, I mean, we're still above the bullish control line. And we're in a little bit of a falling wedge here. So again, these things are feasible to believe that this thing pops up here. I don't know that it does this though, but let's assume rounded bottom pattern, same concept. Now all of a sudden, instead of a measured move for just this portion, maybe we actually are bouncing out of here in some sort of rounded pattern. Then we come up here. If this is the real pattern that's playing out, now all of a sudden we're 22,000 and change. And things start to look very different, right? Now we're not getting the inverse head and shoulders that I was thinking about at first, so that's where we kind of have to revisit what we're actually working with here. Now who knows, this thing could actually round out into this much larger rounded bottom, at which point now the measured move goes from here to here. All of a sudden when that breaks out, potentially, measured move now takes us up to 23 and change. And we already know we absolutely need to get above this level this week. I mean, that's the most ideal scenario we could be in, would be to break above this level, so we can clear the moving averages we need to clear. But yeah, again, this pattern should break down. And just kind of coming back to the current times, this pattern, assuming it's not ultimately a rounded bottom, which it could be, but assuming that this pattern is in fact just a rising wedge, boom, we are going to pull back out of there. Again, measured move of that isn't, obviously I'll resize that. Go ahead and get, nope, not that one. Let's go ahead and get this guy back out of here. Measured move, let's say it breaks down right here. Now all of a sudden we're potentially breaking down this 20K level again. It seems as though the bulls are defending that pretty well. I mean, I was a little surprised to see it hold up as many times as it did yesterday. But this was on shorter term time frames. So, but again, this would be measured move to the downside, form a new pattern, probably flip this back into resistance if it does break to the downside. And then we can start looking at some downside targets and maybe start looking more into, Friday, Saturday, Sunday for any bullish moves to come from here. But we'll see. And, again, I guess the biggest thing, just kind of looking at this, any downside targets I have, ideally don't come down below here. We do not want to set a new low this week. That would be very problematic. And in fact, it would be ideal if we just simply don't set a lower low at all. So at this point, assuming that we're going to get a super recovery out of here, then we could look at this and say, all right, well this is going to be the low. Just tough to say if that's going to be the case. Now, again, we've got some upside targets, we've got some downside targets. Let's see what plays out. We appreciate you as always. Love chatting with you guys about Bitcoin and technical analysis and breaking some things down for you. Looking forward to catching up again very soon.